podcast where we put you on the map. This is Ron Costa broadcasting live from the Mappable USA studios here in Las Vegas. And folks, today we're going to talk about crowdfunding. I'm going to go right for the horse's mouth. Some of the people actually wrote the laws almost. So before we do that, let's introduce Vicky Hutchmala from the World Token Market. Vicky, how are you doing today?
Fabulous day in Vegas, Ron, like every day. I'm doing great. And looking forward to this is going to be an exciting podcast with our guests because we're going to take crowdfunding from a different point of view in the statistical data interpretation of how people and companies are using crowdfunding. So I think that's going to be fun, exciting, and let's get started.
All right. Well, you know, I love my baseball and advanced analytics, so let's just bring this to crowdfunding now. So well, as we do that, let's introduce Woodie Neiss. Woodie's the partner over at Crowdfund Capital Advisors. Woodie, how are you doing today?
I am great, Ron, Vicky. It is exciting to be here with you today.
Glad
Our
to have
pleasure,
you. Glad
Woodie.
to have you on board for the podcast. And I know we've been talking to you for a while. I see all your posts online, and it's always really interesting stuff. And you know, like we said before we started the podcast, we're always talking about companies and marketing and strategies and this. And now we're going to kind of get into it from a numbers perspective, and you know, who better than you for that. But before we do that, let's tell the audience a little bit about your background and, you know, how you got to where you are right now.
Sure. Thanks, Ron. So I started my career on Wall Street on the trading floor for UBS, which is now Payne Weber. I switched over to the retail side and moved out to California, left that and went to work for a Silicon Valley startup that was acquired by Oracle, but learned a lot about Sand Hill Road and how startups, high growth ones, are funded through venture capital and use that to scale. I left that and started my own healthcare technology company with my brother-in-law in Washington, D.C., called Flavor RX. We flavored medicines for children so they're more compliant. We were a 3-time Inc. 500 company. We won EY's Entrepreneur of the Year award, and we grew that from one pharmacy to 40,000. We sold that to a private equity group, so I really got a feel for starting, scaling, funding, and exiting a business. When I exited that, I was frustrated about the fact that I could only raise money from accredited investors. I learned that when I was running FlavorX. And so I sat down with 3 friends of mine and I said, you know, we're all successful entrepreneurs. We all use venture capital. We all know that they use Reg D for these exemptions under which, you know, we raise capital. What happens if we merge the principles of Kiva and Kickstarter, which is donation and sort of, you know, rewards type crowdfunding, or you know, a debt really on the Kiva side, with, you know, this social network that we're seeing and sort of early stage venture capital. And so we sat down and wrote an 8-bullet point framework on for what, you know, regulation crowdfunding might look like. I was in, you know, Washington, D.C. I shopped it around to the people on the Hill that I knew and was able to get some traction. A hearing was called. The White House had someone listening at that hearing. They reached out subsequent to that, and the bill really took form then, went to the House, passed the House. We went over to the Senate. We testified, believe it or not, 5 times in front of House and Senate panel hearings. So it was very Hollywood-esque in how that happened. And in 460 days, guys, we went from idea to sitting in the Rose Garden of the White House as President Obama signed our bill into law.
Score.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's
really
cool. That's amazing how a non-politician actually gets things done, right?
Right. Well, and you know what, that was the joke, because he said never in the history of, you know, at least in his, you know, presidency, has something ever happened so quickly and by people that were not involved in politics, because we were entrepreneurs. And literally when we walked in the halls of Congress, people are like, well, what lobbying firm are you with? What law firm are you with? And we're like, we're not. We're just entrepreneurs. And they're like, wait, really? So that was one of the lessons. Is you just need to show up in Washington, D.C. and tell people why you're there and what you want, because, you know, it's just an insular circle there, and people from the outside don't really come in.
Yeah, exactly. And plus, they have no concept of how business works or how money works, or, you know, like you said, they're insular and they just don't know what a surprise to get somebody who knew what they were talking about and make something happen that was fabulous.
Yeah, I mean, you would have been surprised. We sat in the offices of representatives and senators, particularly the ones that were key in crafting legislation, until 11 p.m. some nights, where we were, going back and forth and debating the pros and cons of certain aspects of the bill and being like, listen, if we want to do this, how do we protect investors? And so, I know all of the inside story of the sausage. I remember talking with Andy Green in Senator Merkley's office, where he's just like, are these securities freely transferable? And I was like, well, investors do one out. I don't understand why you need to lock them up. And he's like, yeah, but what about pumping and dumping? And I was like, okay, so if we want to cut out pumping and dumping, let's just put a 12-month holding period on the securities. And that's where the 12-month holding period came from. Everyone's just like, where did the SEC come up with it? I was like, they didn't. I was sitting in the office with Andy Green, and we put that in the bill.
Yeah.
Oh, fabulous.
Well, you mentioned earlier about companies like Kickstarter, et cetera, when crowdfunding just came out. And now all of a sudden we had this advanced version, equity crowdfunding. It started off slow, like all things do for the most part, but it's been exploding recently. And now it's what, a $2.5 billion industry or whatever that is. How did that happen?
Yeah, that's a great point. So when we were leaving the White House, Karen Kerrigan, who was our chief advocate, she runs the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council in Washington, D.C., and she really was the one that connected us with all the key players in the Senate Banking Committee and the House Financial Services Committee. She said to me, she's like, Woody, I just want to, cap your expectations. No one's going to know what you guys have done for 5 years. And I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, I equate this to medical savings accounts. We passed it. It was 5 years before anyone started using them, and 10 years later, everybody had one. She goes, so I would give it at least 5 years before people really start understanding what it is, and another 5 years until everybody really accepts it. And that's what we've seen in the data. So, like I told you, I started on Wall Street and went to Silicon Valley. In Silicon Valley, I worked for a database company. So I took that experience of creating databases, and I created the database for the industry that aggregates information on every single company that's raising money online. So we collect information on 125 data points in every company, from what they do, where they're located, the industry that they're in, their valuations over time, all their financial information. But we layer on top of that something that no one else has, which is not even PitchBook or Crunchbase. And that's what we call investor sentiment. And the beauty about these deals that are happening through regulation crowdfunding and are happening online is the digital footprint that comes along with it. And so if you're tracking these offerings like we do, every day you get to see where investors are deploying checks and how much they're deploying into active offerings. And right now there's about 600 active offerings on a daily basis that are taking place. Of course,
Wow.
When the industry launched, there were 20. So it's grown dramatically. And we've seen how even during COVID, this really stepped in and helped provide the financing for a lot of these businesses that couldn't find capital elsewhere.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. From the equity crowdfunding perspective, though, you had different options. You have the Reg A, the Reg CF. Are these data points kind of does it take that into consideration that they're two different things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you've got, when the Jobs Act was passed, there were three parts of that really transformed the private capital markets. To your point, you just mentioned Reg A, and that allows companies to raise, up to $75 million online from both retail and accredited investors. But it's a qualified offering, meaning that you have to go through the SEC, they have to review all the documents, and once they're satisfied that you have enough disclosures in there for investors, do they qualify it? That's just them saying you have everything in there that's necessary. They're not actually giving it a signature of approval saying investors should invest in this. But that process, that qualification process, is very burdensome, costly. You need a lot of lawyers, you need accountants. And it takes time, and so it's about $100 to $150,000 to get one of those done. So it's a very different type company that uses it. 506C was the other one in the Jobs Act outside of regulation crowdfunding that really transformed the private capital markets. And 506C took what was already there for 506B, which is accredited investor financing companies that's uncapped, and said you can now do general solicitation. And so we've seen a huge surge in the number of 506C offerings because now people really want to put these offerings up on the internet and do general solicitation and raise capital in a way that opens it up to a broader audience that they couldn't reach before. But the difference between a 506C, a Reg A, and a Reg CF offering is the digital footprint. Now, you can do a 506C and do general solicitation, but it doesn't have to happen on an online investment platform. It doesn't necessarily have to happen through a broker-dealer. You just need to confirm that the investors are, in fact, accredited. A Reg A offering typically takes place through a broker-dealer, but that might not be happening online. It just might be through that broker-dealer's network and how they're doing their solicitation. Reg CF, on the other hand, is a full online digital footprint. Everything that's happening with it is happening online, and that's why we can capture all this information. And that's why we've seen, 8,500 of these offerings take place online all across the United States. There's been over 50, it's happened in all 50 states. I think there's been 1,400 cities where these offerings are taking place. And like you said, we've had about $2.5 billion now be pumped into these companies. I'll tell you the key difference that's happening right now than even 2 years ago is the parallel offerings. So when the industry first got started, you had strictly Reg CF offerings, and you could only raise up to $1 million until 2021 or 2 when the SEC moved that up to $5 million that issuers could raise. And so it changed the type of issuers coming to the marketplace. But now we're seeing these parallel offerings where people are like, well, I want to raise $10 million. And so they're doing a side-by-side where one of it's a Reg CF offering and they're raising up to the $5 million max there. But the other side's a 506C offering where you can raise, an unlimited amount from those accredited investors. And we're seeing these larger, more sophisticated, older, much more revenue-generating companies coming in, raising a lot more money through this. And, that's sort of what's tipping the needle in the past couple years in terms of the amount of capital that's being raised.
So, Woody, what does your data show as the industries or the companies that are using crowdfunding, regardless of what platform they're using, Reg A, Reg CF, whatever it is? What would you? Yeah.
That's a great question, and I hear that a lot. Who is this applicable for? And so because we track the industries, we track both NAICS code, which is like used by Bloomberg and all that stuff, but we also roll everything up into our own little 31 different sort of industry subsectors. When you look at the data from that subsector point of view, what we see is software and technology is the number one. So the most offerings, the most capital that's raised is in this. And, when we were lobbying for this in Washington, D.C., honestly, that's what we thought. We thought there's two groups that are really going to benefit from this. Your high-tech Silicon Valley-esque type companies that do not reside in or near Silicon Valley or New York City. So the brain trusts of all these great ideas coming out of universities or people that just live in, like, here I am in Denver, or actually where you are, Vicki, in Las Vegas. Las Vegas is always number one on our genome startup for the crowdfunding ecosystem. But that's not necessarily VC-intensive territory. So we thought it would be really good for them. And on the other side, we're like, this is going to be great for all these Main Street type of businesses that are cash flowing but can't qualify for a bank loan because maybe they're less than 3 years old. But what we've seen since then is something that's completely different. There's been over 540 NAICS code that have been funded. So it doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you've got a great idea with a great team, you've probably built a business before, you've got a track record, and you've got an engaged audience, be it customers, fans, friends, family, this is a great way for you to extend that branch of trust that you've built on your own in terms of getting your company off the ground and saying, you know what, I really need the voice of the crowd now. I really need my network of friends to come in and invest in the business, which provide me capital, but do something much more than the capital, which is help me get a message out there to a broader audience, help me get sales coming in because you have a network that can amplify my messaging. And that's this interim stage that we see with investment crowdfunding, which I didn't realize was going to come out of the data at all, but it clearly is a stepping stone now to venture capital. And so we're seeing that within the data set. But to your point, it's not just software and technology. You would be shocked at the amount of electric vehicle companies that use crowdfunding as a mechanism to raise money. Healthcare, biotech. I mean, we have a monthly report that does a deep dive into what happened in investment crowdfunding each month. And then we do an industry breakout. So we've covered software and technology. We've covered AI and blockchain in regulation crowdfunding. Our last month was just debt offerings. Like, let's uncover what's happening in the P2B, debt crowdfunding space so we can see what's happening there. So, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, it's happening all over the place. And I think that's an exciting byproduct of this.
That's the thing I like so much about crowdfunding is the ability to go down to your customers and let your customers, or as you said, your friends and family and that, buy into your brand, buy into your company and feel part of the process, and be able to have that pride in saying, yes, I've invested in this, and tell your friends and bring them in. And it's like becomes cyclical with the people that you can use as your investors without having to go to, you don't need to raise the $75 million if you're not at that level, but bring everybody in and use them to brand your company. I think that's one of the better concepts of crowdfunding, merging it with blockchain and being able to tokenize too. That's great. It allows everybody to participate.
Yeah, I completely agree 100%. And you know what the benefit about this as well is? These investors that are banking on people that they know, so they already, believe in the individuals, mainly because I believe that, the majority of the investors in this have a first or second degree relationship to either the entrepreneur or the business. But they're getting in at the earliest stage of growth.
Exactly.
And what that means is that's also the lowest valuation point. So, yeah, not all these companies are going to be successful. I think they stand a better chance. And actually, if you look at the data that's coming out of there, I think we've seen a 287% revenue growth in the year after a company does a crowdfunding raise than the year in which they did their initial raise. So clearly that crowd is able to bring people in. But if you allow them to become investors in there and they do succeed, these people are potentially going to be millionaires, and there's some great success stories about that.
Yes, yeah, and that's what makes it special. I like that part.
Yeah, so do I.
Yeah.
Woody, you have a lot better information than what you'll get at the craps table here in Las Vegas to be a millionaire. That's for sure. So, but
right.
Going back to what you said before on your reports that you send out, these reports then are tailored towards investors. Then is that the case that you're kind of looking at? An investor may look at this and say, "Oh, look at this. There's a lot of growth here in the medical or real estate, et cetera. Maybe I should look into this company." Is that the goal of the reports?
Yeah, exactly. So we had all this data and we were sitting on it and people were like, wow, this data is fascinating. And then someone said to us, you need to make a product out of this data. And we're like, oh. And so we started with a weekly tear sheet that just shows changes in, investments, number of deals, platform activity. And then we expanded that to a biweekly report that shows, how trends are happening on a biweekly basis, comparing that to a monthly, quarterly, annual basis. So people that sort of follow the industry and want to see what's happening, where things are hot, where things might be cooling down. Then we did the monthly report, which is really where we started thinking, well, investors want to see what the top deals are. Investors want to see which platforms have the most activity. Investors want to see which industries are getting a lot of capital, or where in the country. And so that's where we came up with two other products. We have this monthly report, which I was telling you is our sort of industry deep dive. And so you get to see the hottest deals for the month that are just across all industries. And then within a specific sector itself, we show you the top 15 deals in that sector. So for, venture capital, angel investors, anyone that's looking for deal flow, I mean, you can just hone in right on that. The other thing that we have is we took all this data, and 3 years ago, we sat down with 3 PhDs, and we said, I said, listen, I've got this crystal ball. I feel like I can see companies that are going to go on to do great things out of this crystal ball. I personally have had an exit, so I know what it takes to start, scale, grow, and exit a company. I want to build an algorithm off of the data that looks for signals within the data set of companies that are likely to go on for a follow-on round of financing. Not companies that will exit, because who can predict that? But let's see if we can look for signals of companies that have already gone on for follow-on rounds of financing compared to companies that are coming in, and be like, we need to follow this company. So we built that algorithm, and then we actually launched a venture fund called D3VC that invests in companies off of that algorithm. But using a similar algorithm, we now provide investors a list of companies that rank high on that sort of scoring of companies that are likely to go on for a follow-on round of financing or do greater things. So investors that want to see, where should I, when there's 8,500 companies, you have no clue where to begin. Even right now, when there's, over 600 on a monthly basis, where do you even start? This really allows you to hone in on, this is where I want to focus my attention. Something, for one reason or another, raised this company high on the scoring of the algorithm. So it's maybe where I want to start my diligence. We're not telling you to invest in it, but we're saying that, these are companies worth looking at.
Yeah, that's a great idea. The fun thing, especially since you're running it and you kind of are using your own data to do that, what you're saying is that an investor who may just want to say, okay, these guys know what they're doing, they're doing all the data, I should look into this, and I want to invest in their fund because I don't want to do the work. Woody's done the work for me, basically, right? You have to be an accredited investor for that?
For the venture fund, you have to be an accredited investor. For the Capital Pulse report, anyone can have access to that.
Yeah. Excellent.
Woody, has crowdfunding, it started under the Jobs Act and that, but is it still more of a national concept, or has it become a global idea or a global concept that companies around the world can use?
It is a global concept. I just finished the first draft of my manuscript for a book that I'm calling Crowdfundomics, which is really the economics of crowdfunding. And in that book, I dig into what crowdfunding is from a global perspective, because this is happening in countries all across the United States. All across the world. One of the coolest things after, the president signed the bill into law is the phone calls we received. We got a phone call from Wiley, the book publisher, and saying, hey, you guys wrote the law, write the Dummies book. So we wrote the Dummies Guide to Investment Crowdfunding. Then the other group that called us was the World Bank, and they said, this is phenomenal what you guys did for entrepreneurs in the United States, but this is really needed by entrepreneurs in the developing world. So we wrote the World Bank report, Crowdfunding's Potential for the Developing World, and then the State Department also hired us and said, you guys can help promote diplomacy and get people off the streets and hating the United States if we can get them to create businesses that will create jobs. And they're focused on growing businesses rather than a reason not to like the U.S. So between the State Department, the World Bank, they sent us to 43 countries around the world to help create crowdfunding ecosystems. And it's been amazing. We propped up the crowdfunding ecosystem in Chile. We worked in Mexico. Believe it or not, we spent a year going back and forth to Saudi Arabia, got the entire crowdfunding ecosystem up and running there. But on the same hand, we worked in Israel. So we worked everywhere in the world where people were interested in how did they leverage this within the confines of their own culture and society, the cultural norms, because it's very different from the U.S. and you have to take that into consideration. But this is happening in countries all around the world, in Africa, and, just everywhere.
Right. Making the world a better place. I love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. All right. This is great. Well, let's tell the audience how to get involved in this if they want more information or if they want to talk about your funds. What's the best way for somebody to contact you or get involved?
There's three areas. So Crowdfund Capital Advisors sort of sits at the intersection of what we say are three themes. The data is one of those themes, and it's the underlying thing for everything that we do. And so from the data, that's our product line called CClear, CCLEAR. So if people want any of those reports that we were just talking about, they could go to shop.cclear, CCLEAR.ai, and that'll take you to all of the reports that we have there that people can subscribe to. Of course, the data is the underlying part of the venture fund. That venture fund's called D3VC, and the website for that is d3vc.ai. So if people want to get information about the venture fund, they can learn about it there. And then the third one that we didn't talk about is liquidity. So, people invest in all these private companies, but they don't want to be stuck in it until there's an exit, a sale, a merger, an IPO. So we created a fintech company called Guard. And Guard facilitates the liquidity of investors from private company investments by helping the companies that they invested in do ongoing disclosures to comply with state-by-state securities laws that govern the secondary trading of securities, such that these investments can be traded on alternative trading systems. So Guard, GUARDD.com, is for people that are really interested in the liquidity side of it, interested in secondary trading, and the compliance that you have to have with Blue Sky for that. But crowdfundcapitaladvisors.com is the one that sits on top of all that.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff. I thought I had a lot of websites. but Woody, you mentioned in that the magical word AI right now. How is AI going to affect this whole crowdfunding thing? Right? Everybody's talking about AI this, AI that. What do you think?
I mean, that's essentially what the concept of the venture fund was. We had a couple things going for us right now. Is you got a bunch of data, but now you've got machine learning, you've got artificial intelligence, where you've got the ability to create algorithms or to help people hone in on opportunities. And that was one side of it. The other side of it is institutional capital that is missing from this marketplace. Now, if you saw what happened in the peer-to-peer lending space about, a decade ago, it popped once institutional capital came in. It's transformed the entire industry. It's a very different thing for institutional capital to invest in an individual startup because they don't have the bandwidth to do the diligence, the sourcing, what is required at that granular level. So what we were saying is if we can merge the principles of our data with AI and machine learning, create this algorithm so that we can do the vetting, the looking at the companies and do the investing, now we've created a segue for institutional capital to come into the marketplace through larger subsequent funds that we put together. And I think that's part of what the future is leveraging the power of AI to allow institutional money to come into the marketplace that will really allow this ecosystem to really take off. I mean, when I talk about takeoff, I'm talking about the economic stimulus that this is going to have. Right now, there's about $6.8 billion that these companies are pumping into our economy on a daily basis. And that's, just with 8,500 offerings. You multiply that by 10, and you can see the economic impact that it's going to have. There's $79 billion of pent-up economic value in these companies. You get institutional capital in here, that's only going to increase that. So the wealth that will be created, the amount of jobs that will be created, the local economic stimulus that will happen because these companies are not in Silicon Valley and New York City, they're spread all across the United States, is going to have a major impact, and that's where that AI is going to really play a role.
Awesome. That's really, listen, anything that's data-driven is okay by me. I think this whole thing is fascinating. Vicki, do you have any last questions or thoughts for Woody before we close this out?
As I said, we were going to have an exciting podcast, and boy, did we ever. Woody, what you are doing and Crowdfunding Capital Advisors, what you're doing encompasses everything that I think is special in the world. The data that you're collecting provides entrepreneurs and business leaders to have more information. The more information you have, the better decisions that you can make, and the better decisions you make are what change the world into a better place. And all of that is what I really, really love in allowing everybody to be able to partake in it. I think that people, our listeners today, absolutely need to contact you for the data so that they can understand how to make a better decision, so that they can understand how to plan for the future, for future growth or offshoots of whatever it is they're doing. And all of this is to change the world and make it a better place. As you said, it's become a worldwide concept, and it's helping people. It's providing jobs. It's providing an economy. It's increasing the value of people's lives, and that is changing the world. And oh my God, kudos to you, Woody, for creating such a fabulous product for everybody to use. I congratulate you.
Oh, well, I'm humbly thankful, so thank you.
Woody, I think
Absolutely
I think you should bring Vicki along to your next conference.
Okay, I'm up for it.
I would love it. You can open anytime you want. That was very, very kind of you. I appreciate that.
Well, again,
It's an absolute truth.
Thank you, Woody, so much for taking the time out, being a guest on the show today. Vicki, thanks for co-hosting this. And folks, if you're listening to the Mappable USA podcast at MappableUSA.com, if you go there, you scroll down our homepage, you'll see all our syndication sources. Pick the one you like best, subscribe, and you'll never miss another one of our episodes. If you're going to be a guest on the show like Woody was today, there's a guest tab there. Fill that out. We'll see what you can do about getting on the show. And if you like what you heard today, send us an email at info@MappableUSA.com, or just leave a message on whatever page you're listening to this on right now. So thanks for listening. Thanks for your support. We'll see you next time. We're on the Mappable USA podcast. Have a great week, everyone.